The sun peeked through the blinds as Andre Taylor opened his eyes, reaching for his phone to silence the alarm. As CEO of Taylor Investments, his mornings usually began with a flurry of emails and conference calls. But today was different. Among the usual business messages was something unexpected, a wedding invitation from an old college acquaintance. Richard Wilson. Andre sat up in bed, coffee in hand, studying the elaborate invitation with its gold-embossed lettering. It had been nearly 15 years since he'd spoken to Richard. They weren't exactly friends in college, more like casual acquaintances who occasionally ended up at the same study groups and parties. Andre remembered Richard as somewhat privileged and entitled but generally harmless back then. Andre muttered to himself. Didn't expect to hear from him after all these years. He swiped through his morning news briefing while considering the invitation. The business section featured yet another article about his latest acquisition. A historic downtown building he was converting into affordable housing while preserving its architectural significance. The project had earned him praise from both business leaders and community advocates, adding to his already impressive reputation. After showering and dressing, Andre made his way to the kitchen of his penthouse apartment. The space was impressive but not ostentatious. High ceilings, clean lines, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Many of the buildings visible from his window were ones he now owned or had invested in. His assistant, Nancy, called as he was finishing breakfast. Good morning, Mr. Taylor. Just confirming your 9 a.m. with the foundation board and reminding you about the city council meeting at 2 p.m. regarding the new community center. Thanks, Nancy. Could you do me a favor and find out anything you can about Richard Wilson? He's an old college classmate who just invited me to his wedding. I'm trying to decide whether to attend. After hanging up, Andre walked to his home office and picked up a framed photo from his desk, a younger version of himself in a graduation cap and gown, standing proudly beside his parents. He smiled at the memory. His father had worked 2 jobs to help put him through school, and his mother had insisted education was the path to a better life. They'd been right, though they could never have imagined just how far their son would go. 20 years later, Andre was now worth billions, owned numerous businesses across the city, and employed thousands. His investment firm was renowned for both its profitability and ethical practices. Despite his wealth, he lived relatively modestly compared to other people in his financial bracket. He drove nice cars but not flashy ones. He owned beautiful homes but not dozens of them. His passion was building businesses that created jobs while solving problems in the community. Later that day, after finishing his meetings, Andre found an email from Nancy with information about Richard Wilson. Richard works in middle management at Northside Financial. Married twice before, this will be his 3rd wedding. He's active in the country club scene, seems to live beyond his means based on social media. Several mutual college contacts will be attending the wedding, including James Chen and Olivia Washington. Andre's interest perked up at those last 2 names. James and Olivia had been good friends during college, and he'd lost touch with them over the years as his business demanded more and more of his time. The chance to reconnect with them was appealing. After some consideration, Andre decided to RSVP yes to the wedding. It would be nice to see old faces, and besides, he rarely took time away from work for social events. His therapist had been encouraging him to create more balance in his life, to remember there was more to living than building his empire. The next few weeks flew by in a blur of meetings, decisions, and planning sessions. Andre's latest venture, a tech incubator designed to give opportunities to promising entrepreneurs from underserved communities, was taking shape nicely. The first round of applicants showed incredible promise, and he was personally mentoring several of them. The day before the wedding, Andre was reviewing applications when his phone rang. It was his mother. Hey Mom, everything okay? Everything's fine, baby. Just checking in. You still going to that wedding tomorrow? Yeah, figured it might be nice to see some old faces. His mother paused. You know how some people can be, just take care of yourself, okay? Andre understood what she meant. Throughout his life and career, he'd encountered plenty of people who made assumptions about him based solely on his appearance. Even now, when he walked into certain rooms without being recognized, he sometimes received looks or treatment that his white counterparts never experienced. Success hadn't shielded him from prejudice. In some ways, it had just made the contrasts more stark. I'll be fine, Mom, it's just a wedding. After they hung up, Andre went to his closet to select an outfit for tomorrow. He chose a well-tailored but understated navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and a subtle patterned tie. His stylist had tried to convince him to wear more flashy clothes befitting his status, but Andre preferred elegance over ostentation. He believed true power didn't need to announce itself. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect weather. Andre arranged for his driver to take him to the Hillcrest Country Club, where the ceremony would be held. As they drove through the city, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride seeing the changes his investments had helped bring about. The revitalized downtown area, the new tech campus that employed hundreds, the art center that had been on the verge of closing before his foundation stepped in. When they arrived at the country club, Andre noticed the extravagance immediately. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, flowers seemed to cover every available surface, and staff in formal attire directed guests to the ceremony site. It was tasteful but clearly expensive. The kind of wedding that made statements about wealth and status. Andre handed his keys to the valet and straightened, his tie before walking, toward the garden where the ceremony would take place. A few guests gave him curious glances, clearly trying to place him or perhaps wondering how he fit into the social circle. He was used to this kind of scrutiny and paid it little mind. As he approached the seating area, a familiar voice called his name. Andre? Andre Taylor, is that you? He turned to see Olivia Washington hurrying toward him, a wide smile on her face. She looked different from college, more polished with streaks of silver in her dark hair that somehow only enhanced her elegance. But her warm smile was exactly as he remembered. Olivia. It's been too long, he said, genuinely happy to see her. When James told me you might be coming, I couldn't believe it. We followed your success in the news, of course, but it's not the same as catching up in person. They embraced, and Andre felt a wave of nostalgia. College seemed both yesterday and a lifetime ago. Speaking of James, is he here yet? Andre asked, looking around. He's inside helping his wife wrangle their twins. They're flower girls in the ceremony, and they're already running the poor wedding planner ragged. Olivia laughed. He'll be thrilled to see you. We should grab dinner after all this, catch up properly. As they talked, more guests arrived, filling the rows of white chairs. Andre noticed Richard, the groom, greeting people near the altar. He looked older, with a receding hairline and a slight paunch that his expensive suit couldn't quite disguise. When Richard's eyes landed on Andre, there was a moment of confusion, then recognition, followed by something Andre couldn't quite place. Surprise, perhaps, or uncertainty. Richard gave a small nod in their direction but made no move to come greet them. Andre wasn't surprised or offended. They hadn't been close after all. He was here more for the chance to reconnect with Olivia, James, and any other old friends who might be attending. So, what's your connection to Richard these days? Andre asked Olivia as they found seats near the middle of the arrangement. I was surprised to get an invitation, to be honest. Olivia lowered her voice slightly. My husband does business with his company. I think Richard's guest list has more to do with networking than actual friendships. You know how some people are, always climbing, always connecting. Andre nodded. He understood that mentality, though he'd never operated that way himself. His success had come from genuine passion for his work and treating people with respect, not from collecting important contacts like trophies. As the ceremony was about to begin, James slipped into the seat beside them, looking slightly frazzled but happy. His face lit up when he saw Andre, the man himself, Andre Taylor in the flesh. Man, every time I see your name in the business section, I tell my wife, I knew that guy in college. James extended his hand, then pulled Andre into a quick hug instead. We need to catch up. I want to hear everything. Not everything, Andre laughed. That would take weeks. But yes, let's catch up after all this. The music started, signaling the beginning of the ceremony. As the bridal party began their procession, Andre settled into his seat, watching as Richard stood at the altar waiting for his bride. Looking around at the lavish setting, the expensive clothes, the carefully cultivated image of success, Andre couldn't help but reflect on the different paths people took through life and the, different ways they measured their worth. Little did he know that this wedding would become much more than a simple reunion with old friends. By the end of the day, perceptions would be shattered, assumptions challenged, and the true measure of a person's character would be revealed in ways no one could have anticipated. The ceremony was elegant but predictable. Vows exchanged, rings presented, a kiss that lasted just long enough to please the photographer. Throughout it all, Andre found himself people-watching more than paying attention to the actual wedding. He observed the body language between the bride and groom, the expressions of the parents, the restlessness of the children dressed in uncomfortable formal wear. Years of business negotiations had made him skilled at reading people. As the ceremony concluded and guests moved toward the reception hall, Andre fell into step beside James and Olivia. "So how have you two been? Fill me in on the last 15 years, Andre said with a genuine smile. He had missed these friendships more than he'd realized. "Well, I married my college sweetheart, you remember May? She couldn't make it today, pediatrician emergency. We have twin girls now, absolute handfuls," James said. "I went the corporate lawyer route. Nothing as exciting as what you've been up to." Olivia jumped in. "I'm running the art department at Westside University now. Tenure and everything. It's a far cry from our days of painting in that tiny studio apartment." They entered the reception hall, which was transformed into a vision of white flowers, crystal, and gold accents. A string quartet played softly in the corner while servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. "And what about you, Andre? Though I feel like I already know from all the news coverage. The Taylor Foundation, Taylor Investments, Taylor Tech Incubator." "You've been busy," Olivia said, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server. Andre shrugged modestly. "Work keeps me occupied. It's rewarding to see projects come to life, create jobs, make a difference in the community." "He's being humble," James said to Olivia. Last month, the Business Journal estimated his net worth at over $3 billion. The article called him the Quiet Titan, because half the city doesn't even realize one man owns so many of the buildings they work in. Andre looked uncomfortable with the attention. "Those estimates are often exaggerated. Besides, it's not about the money." "Of course it's not," a new voice cut in. Richard Wilson, the groom, had approached their small group. "Andre Taylor, I wasn't sure you'd actually come." There was something slightly off in Richard's tone, not quite hostile, but not particularly welcoming either. Andre extended his hand. "Congratulations on your marriage, Richard. Thank you for the invitation." Richard shook his hand briefly, his grip unnecessarily firm. "Yes, well, when I was putting together the guest list, I thought it might be interesting to reconnect with old college faces. Though I admit I hadn't realized just how successful you'd become." The way he said successful carried an undercurrent of something unpleasant. Andre chose to ignore it. "You've done well yourself," Andre replied smoothly. "Beautiful wedding. Your bride seems lovely." Richard nodded, distracted. His eyes kept darting to other guests, clearly calculating who else he needed to greet. "Yes, Heather comes from a good family. Her father is on the board at Northside Financial where I work. You should meet him later, though I'm sure you run in much more impressive circles these days." Olivia and James exchanged a look that Andre caught. Clearly, Richard's barely concealed resentment wasn't lost on them either. "If you'll excuse me, I should continue greeting guests." "Enjoy the reception," Richard said, already moving toward a group of older men in expensive suits. As he walked away, James let out a low whistle. "Well, he hasn't changed much, has he? Still has that chip on his shoulder." Andre shrugged it off. "People are who they are. Let's find our table." The three friends made their way to their assigned seats. Andre noticed he'd been placed at a table far from the wedding party, despite several empty chairs at more prominent tables. Another slight perhaps, but not one worth dwelling on. As they settled in, more guests arrived and the reception hall grew livelier. Andre found himself genuinely enjoying the chance to catch up with his old friends. James told stories about his daughters. Olivia shared details about her latest art exhibition, and Andre listened more than he spoke. Happy to focus on something other than business for once. "You know what's funny?" Olivia said after a while. "In college, everyone thought you'd be the one to become an artist. You had such talent, Andre." He laughed softly. "I still paint sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep. It helps clear my head. The next time you're in town, you should visit my classroom. My students would love to hear from someone who found a way to balance creativity and business success." "I'd like that," Andre said, and meant it. The dinner service began with servers bringing out course after course of expertly prepared food. The conversation at their table flowed easily, and Andre found himself relaxing, almost forgetting the slight tension from his interaction with Richard earlier. That changed when he excused himself to visit the restroom. As he walked across the reception hall, he noticed more than a few curious glances. He was used to being recognized, but this felt different. These weren't looks of recognition, but of speculation. He caught fragments of whispered conversations. Who invited him? I heard he's some big-shot investor now. From the wrong side of town originally. The old familiar feeling settled in his stomach. The awareness of being judged, of being seen as an outsider regardless of his accomplishments. He had hoped that building his success would eventually eliminate these moments, but they still came, just in different settings with different people. In the restroom, he took a moment to collect himself, straightening his already perfect tie and taking a deep breath. He reminded himself why he was here, to reconnect with old friends, not to impress Richard or his judgmental wedding guests. When he returned to the reception, the dance floor had opened up, and couples were swaying to the music. Andre declined several dance invitations, preferring to observe from his table. He watched Richard and his new bride moving stiffly around the dance floor, looking more concerned with appearances than enjoying their first dance as a married couple. "Not much of a dancer?" asked an older woman who had taken the empty seat beside him. "Only when the music's worth dancing to," Andre replied with a small smile. The woman laughed. "I'm Eleanor Walsh, mother of the bride. And you are?" "Andre Taylor, college acquaintance of Richard's." Recognition flickered in her eyes. "Taylor? As in Taylor Investments? The one who just donated that new wing to the children's hospital?" Andre nodded modestly. "That's me." "Well," Eleanor said, looking impressed, "I had no idea Richard ran in such distinguished circles in college. You must have been quite the ambitious young man even then." Before Andre could respond, a commotion near the gift table caught everyone's attention. Richard was speaking loudly to one of the wedding planners, gesturing emphatically at the table. "Is something wrong?" Eleanor asked a server who was passing by. "I believe one of the wedding gifts has gone missing, ma'am." The server replied quietly, "An expensive crystal vase from the Robertson family." Eleanor frowned and excused herself to join her new son-in-law. Andre watched as the situation unfolded, Richard's face growing increasingly flushed as he spoke to the wedding planner. The bride looking embarrassed, guests beginning to murmur among themselves. Olivia returned from the dance floor and sat beside Andre. "Drama already? That didn't take long." "Apparently a gift has gone missing," Andre explained. Probably just misplaced in all the commotion," Olivia said. "Though from the way Richard's acting, you'd think someone stole the crown jewels." They watched as Richard spoke with the venue manager, then began scanning the room with narrowed eyes. His gaze landed on their table, lingered for a moment too long on Andre, then moved on. "Did he just—" Olivia began. "Yes, I think he did," Andre replied calmly, though he felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the feeling that came whenever someone made assumptions about him based solely on his appearance. James returned with drinks for their table. "What did I miss?" As Olivia filled him in, Andre noticed Richard speaking to a security guard who had appeared at the entrance to the reception hall. The guard nodded and began a subtle circuit of the room, watching guests with practiced casualness. "You've got to be kidding me," James muttered. "He called security over a missing gift?" "It's fine," Andre said, though it wasn't. He'd built a billion-dollar business empire, donated millions to charity, created thousands of jobs, and yet here he was, being eyed with suspicion at a wedding he'd been invited to attend. The evening continued, but the mood had shifted. Guests spoke in hushed tones, glancing around with newfound wariness. The bride looked increasingly uncomfortable, especially when Richard began moving from table to table, ostensibly thanking guests but clearly investigating at the same time. When Richard finally approached their table, his smile was tight and didn't reach his eyes. "Having a good time? I hope the seating arrangements are suitable." "Everything's lovely," Olivia replied coolly, "though I heard there was some trouble with the missing gift." Richard's eyes flicked briefly to Andre before responding. "Yes, unfortunately. A rather valuable crystal piece from my new father-in-law's business associate. I'm sure it will turn up, though. These things usually do." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. Andre met Richard's gaze steadily. "I hope you find it soon. It would be a shame to let something like this overshadow your special day." Richard held his gaze for a moment, then nodded stiffly and moved on to the next table. The nerve of that guy. James whispered once Richard was out of earshot. Andre, you don't have to put up with this. We can leave if you want. Andre considered it for a moment. Part of him wanted to walk out, to refuse to be subjected to this kind of treatment. But another part, the part that had faced down prejudice throughout his life and career, refused to be driven away. No, he said finally. I'm not going anywhere. I was invited and I have every right to be here. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. More than once, Andre caught Richard watching him, whispering to other guests while glancing in his direction. The security guard remained present, hovering near the gift table but occasionally walking past where Andre sat. This is getting ridiculous, Olivia said after a while. Should I say something? Andre shook his head. It wouldn't help. Let's just enjoy the rest of the evening as best we can. This will all blow over once they find the missing gift. What he didn't say was that he'd faced worse than this throughout his life and career. What he didn't say was that even with all his wealth and success, moments like these were a reminder that some people would always see him as an outsider, as someone who didn't belong. What he didn't know was that the situation was about to escalate in ways none of them could have anticipated. The band took a break, and the DJ announced it was time for cake cutting. Guests gathered around the elaborate 5-tier wedding cake that stood in the corner of the reception hall. Andre hung back with James and Olivia, maintaining a pleasant expression despite the increasingly uncomfortable atmosphere. $10 as he smashes cake in her face despite her clearly not wanting him to. James whispered. I don't take sucker bets, Andre replied with a small smile. Sure enough, when Richard pressed a small piece of cake against his new wife's lips, he deliberately smeared some on her cheek, laughing as she forced a smile while quickly reaching for a napkin. The photographer captured the moment and guests applauded, but Andre noticed the bride's mother shaking her head slightly. As the cake was being served, Richard's best man tapped a knife against his champagne glass and called for attention. The traditional speeches began, the maid of honor reminiscing about her friendship with the bride, the father of the bride welcoming Richard to the family with a forced enthusiasm that didn't quite ring true. When the best man began his speech, he was already slightly drunk, swaying as he told inappropriate stories about Richard's bachelor days. Andre noticed the bride's discomfort growing with each anecdote. I need some air, Andre said quietly to his friends. I'll be back in a few minutes. He slipped out through a side door onto a terrace overlooking the country club's golf course. The evening air was cool and refreshing after the stuffiness of the reception hall. He loosened his tie slightly and took a deep breath, letting the tension in his shoulders ease. Quite a circus in there, isn't it? Andre turned to find an older gentleman had followed him outside. The man was well dressed in a tailored gray suit, his silver hair neatly combed, his expression weary but kind. Weddings often are, Andre replied diplomatically. The man chuckled. I'm Harold Walsh, father of the bride, and based on the way my new son-in-law has been watching you all evening, I'm guessing you're the successful college friend he's been so agitated about. Andre extended his hand. Andre Taylor. Pleasure to meet you, sir. Taylor? Harold's eyebrows rose slightly as they shook hands. As in Taylor Investments? The same Taylor who outbid Northside Financial on that downtown development project last year? That would be me, Andre confirmed. Though I didn't realize Richard worked for Northside at the time of the bid. Harold laughed again, this time with genuine amusement. Well, that explains a lot. Richard took that loss personally, spent weeks complaining about it to anyone who would listen. Apparently his team had worked on the proposal, and he'd promised his bosses it was a sure thing. Andre kept his expression neutral. Business is business. We simply offered a better development plan for the community. And now here you are at his wedding, Harold mused. Small world. Indeed. Andre wasn't sure what else to say. He hadn't realized there was a business connection, that Richard's animosity might stem from more than just prejudice. Though that didn't excuse his behavior, Harold studied him for a moment. My wife mentioned you donated the new wing at Children's Memorial Hospital. My granddaughter was treated there last year. Excellent facility, excellent care. I'm glad to hear that, Andre said sincerely. How is your granddaughter doing now? Fully recovered, thank you for asking. Running circles around us all. Harold smiled fondly before his expression grew more serious. Listen, I should mention, there's been some nonsense about a missing wedding gift. Richard seems to think. Before Harold could finish, the terrace door opened and Richard himself stepped out. his face flushed from alcohol and agitation. He stopped short when he saw them together. "There you are, Harold. The photographer wants family pictures." His eyes narrowed as he looked between them. "Everything all right out here?" "Just getting some fresh air and making conversation," Harold replied calmly. "Did you know Mr. Taylor here is responsible for that beautiful new children's hospital wing where Lily was treated?" Richard's jaw tightened visibly. "Is that so? Well, isn't that charitable?" His tone made the compliment sound like an accusation. "If you don't mind, Harold, the family is waiting for photos." As Harold excused himself and followed Richard back inside, he gave Andre an apologetic look over his shoulder. Andre remained on the terrace for a few minutes longer, processing the encounter. It seemed Richard's hostility was a complex mix of prejudice and professional resentment. Not that understanding the source made it any easier to endure. When he finally returned to the reception, the atmosphere had shifted again. The speeches were over, the dancing had resumed, and guests were mingling more freely as the alcohol flowed. Andre found James at their table, checking his phone. "Everything okay?" Andre asked. James looked up. "Yeah, just May texting about the girls." "Where's Olivia?" "I thought she was with you." At that moment, Olivia appeared, her expression troubled. "There you are. Listen, Richard is telling people the security footage shows someone matching your description near the gift table right before the vase went missing." Andre stared at her in disbelief. "There's security footage?" "That's just it. I overheard the venue manager telling the wedding planner there is no footage of the gift table area. They have cameras at the entrances, but not inside the hall itself. Richard is lying." James stood up, anger evident in his posture. "That's it. This has gone too far. We're leaving, and I'm going to have a word with Richard first." "No," Andre said firmly, placing a hand on his friend's arm. "That's exactly what he wants, to create a scene, to make me look like the problem. We're not giving him that satisfaction." "So what do you want to do?" Olivia asked. Before Andre could answer, a commotion arose near the entrance to the reception hall. The bride's younger cousin, a boy of about 11, was being scolded by his mother. From what Andre could hear, the child had been playing under the tables and had taken something that didn't belong to him. The three friends exchanged looks and moved closer to observe what was happening, but "I just borrowed it to look at it," the boy was saying, his voice rising in distress. "I was going to put it back." His mother held up an ornate crystal vase, her expression a mix of embarrassment and anger. "This isn't a toy, Daniel. This is an expensive wedding gift. You can't just take things that don't belong to you." The wedding planner rushed over, relief evident on her face. "Oh, thank goodness. That's the missing Robertson gift." "Where was it?" "Under the table in the corner," the boy's mother explained, her face flushed with embarrassment. Daniel thought it looked interesting and took it to examine it. "I'm so sorry for the trouble." As word spread that the stolen gift had been found, Andre noticed Richard standing nearby, his face unreadable. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment neither man looked away. Then Richard abruptly turned and walked in the opposite direction. "Well," James said quietly, "that's that mystery solved. Though I doubt we'll be hearing any apologies." "We won't," Andre agreed. "But it doesn't matter." They returned to their table, the tension easing somewhat now that the missing gift had been found. Other guests seemed ready to move on as well, the incident becoming just another story to tell about the wedding later. But just as Andre thought the worst was over, Richard approached their table again, this time with the security guard a few steps behind him. His new wife trailed after him, looking increasingly distressed. "I see the vase has been recovered," Richard said, his words slightly slurred. He'd clearly continued drinking heavily. "Convenient timing, wouldn't you say?" Andre looked at him steadily. "What exactly are you implying, Richard?" "I'm not implying anything. I just find it interesting that the gift goes missing. You disappear outside and suddenly the gift is found, with some convenient story about a child taking it." The bride tugged at Richard's arm. "Richard, please. Let's go back to our table. Everything's fine now." He shook her off. "No, Heather, it's not fine. I invited this man to our wedding as a courtesy, and this is how he repays us? By causing a scene?" The irony of who was actually causing a scene wasn't lost on anyone at the table. Several nearby guests had stopped their conversations to watch. Andre remained calm. "I think you've had too much to drink, Richard." Why don't you listen to your wife and enjoy the rest of your wedding? Don't tell me what to do at my own wedding, Richard snapped, his voice rising. You might have everyone else fooled with your fancy suits and your company, but I know exactly what kind of person you are. Olivia stood up. Richard, you're embarrassing yourself. Stop this right now. Stay out of this, Olivia, Richard said without looking at her. His focus remained entirely on Andre. I want him removed from my wedding now. He turned to the security guard. Escort him out. The security guard looked uncomfortable. Sir, I don't think I said escort him out. He wasn't invited to stay this long anyway. A heavy silence fell over the nearby tables. The bride covered her face with her hands. James half rose from his chair, ready to defend his friend. But Andre placed a restraining hand on his shoulder. Slowly, deliberately, Andre stood up. He was taller than Richard by several inches, and despite the groom's bluster, Richard took an instinctive step back. Let me make something perfectly clear, Andre said, his voice quiet but carrying. I was invited to this wedding. I have caused no trouble. The missing gift has been found. There is no reason for me to leave. Richard's face contorted with anger and something else, perhaps fear at being challenged publicly. You don't belong here, he hissed, too quietly for most to hear, but loud enough for Andre and his friends. The words hung in the air between them, the real meaning behind them unmistakable, and that's when a new voice entered the conversation. Clear, authoritative, and unmistakably angry. That's enough. Richard. It was Harold Walsh, the bride's father, who had approached unnoticed during the confrontation. You will not speak to a guest that way at my daughter's wedding. Richard turned, startled. Harold, you don't understand. This man is Andre Taylor, CEO of Taylor Investments and one of the most respected businessmen in the city. Harold finished for him. And you're making a complete fool of yourself. The reception hall had fallen completely silent. Every guest was watching the confrontation unfold, their expressions ranging from shocked to embarrassed to morbidly fascinated. The band had stopped playing mid-song, leaving only the sound of Richard's heavy breathing as he stared at his new father-in-law in disbelief. You can't be serious, Richard sputtered, his face flushed from alcohol and anger. You're taking his side? Harold Walsh's expression remained stern. There are no sides here, Richard. Only appropriate and inappropriate behavior at my daughter's wedding. Right now you're firmly in the inappropriate category. The bride, Heather, stepped forward, tears welling in her eyes. Richard, please stop. You're ruining everything. For a moment, something like shame flickered across Richard's face as he looked at his wife. Then his expression hardened again. Fine. If no one here can see what's happening, I'll drop it. But I know what I know. He shot one last venomous look at Andre before stalking off toward the bar. Heather gave Andre an apologetic glance. I'm so sorry, she whispered before hurrying after her husband. A murmur of conversation slowly resumed around the reception hall as guests processed what they'd just witnessed. The band started playing again, a cheerful tune that felt jarringly out of place after the tense confrontation. Harold turned to Andre. Mr. Taylor, please accept my apologies for that disgraceful display. I assure you, that's not the kind of family my daughter is married into. He paused, reconsidering his words, or at least not the kind of family I thought she was marrying into. No apology necessary, Mr. Walsh, Andre replied. These things happen, especially at weddings. Emotions run high. You're very gracious, Harold said. More gracious than I'd be in your position. A woman approached them, Catherine Reynolds, according to her introduction. She was a financial journalist with one of the city's major newspapers and had been seated at a nearby table. Mr. Taylor, she said, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help overhearing. I just wanted to say it's an honor to meet you in person. Your work with the Downtown Revitalization Project has transformed the city. Andre smiled politely, though inside he was weary of the evening's drama. Thank you, Ms. Reynolds, that's kind of you to say. Not kind, just accurate, she replied. I've been trying to get an interview with you for months about your approach to ethical investing. Your PR team is quite protective of your schedule. For good reason, Andre said with a small laugh. But I'd be happy to have my assistant set something up. Here's my card. As Andre reached into his pocket for a business card, Catherine's eyes widened slightly. She turned toward the rest of the room and raised her voice. Excuse me, everyone. For those who don't know, This is Andre Taylor, CEO of Taylor Investments. His company employs over 3,000 people in our city alone. His charitable foundation funded the new Children's Hospital Wing, the Downtown Arts Center, and the scholarship program that sends 50 underprivileged students to college each year. Guests turned to look at them, many with expressions of recognition dawning on their faces. Catherine continued, warming to her subject. Forbes magazine named him one of the top 10 most influential business leaders last year. His net worth is estimated at over $3 billion, making him one of the wealthiest people in the state. She turned back to Andre, who was looking increasingly uncomfortable with the attention. And that's just the beginning of his accomplishments. I could go on, but I suspect Mr. Taylor would prefer I didn't. A hushed silence fell over the reception hall again, but this time it was different. A silence of awe rather than tension. Andre caught sight of Richard at the bar, his face frozen in shock as he processed this new information. Thank you for that thorough introduction, Ms. Reynolds, Andre said quietly. Though I think you may have just upstaged the bride and groom at their own wedding. Catherine smiled apologetically. Perhaps. But sometimes setting the record straight is important. Harold Walsh was looking at Andre with new interest. $3 billion, is it? Well, that certainly puts things in perspective. Andre felt a flicker of annoyance. While Catherine had meant well, her announcement had reduced him to his net worth. Exactly the kind of thing he disliked. He was more than a dollar figure, more than his accomplishments. The fact that this information changed how people viewed him was part of the problem. Olivia and James had joined them, sensing Andre might need support. I think we've had enough excitement for one evening, Andre said to his friends. Perhaps it's time to make our exit. I couldn't agree more, Olivia replied. Let's go somewhere more pleasant. Maybe that jazz club downtown. I bet the music is better. As they prepared to leave, a steady stream of guests approached Andre to introduce themselves. Some apologized for Richard's behavior. Others mentioned business propositions or charitable causes they hoped he might support. A few simply wanted to be seen talking to him now that they knew who he was. Andre handled each interaction with grace, but his friends could see his patience wearing thin. James finally stepped in, politely but firmly telling the other guests that they needed to leave. As they made their way toward the exit, Andre spotted Richard and Heather in an intense conversation in a quiet corner. Heather was crying while Richard gestured angrily. Eleanor Walsh, the mother of the bride, stood nearby, her expression troubled as she watched her daughter's wedding day unravel. Andre paused, conflicted. He hadn't asked for any of this drama, and leaving quietly was the simplest solution. But he also felt responsible in a way for the tension that had emerged. Give me a moment, he told his friends, and approached the bride and groom. Richard saw him coming and straightened up, his expression guarded. Heather quickly wiped her tears, attempting to compose herself. Leaving so soon? Richard asked, his tone hostile despite his now wary expression. Yes, Andre said simply. I wanted to thank you both for the invitation and to wish you happiness in your marriage. Richard stared at him, clearly searching for sarcasm or mockery in the words. Finding none, he seemed unsure how to respond. That's very civil of you, he finally managed. I also wanted to apologize, Andre continued. Apologize? Heather asked, surprised. You have nothing to apologize for. Richard was the one who... Andre held up a hand gently. I'm apologizing because my presence has clearly caused tension on what should be a joyful day for you both. That wasn't my intention in accepting the invitation. Richard's face flushed. For a moment it seemed he might lash out again, but something stopped him. Perhaps the realization of who Andre actually was, or maybe just exhaustion from the evening's drama. Well, he said stiffly, these things happen. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was perhaps as close as Richard could manage. Heather reached out and touched Andre's arm. Thank you for coming. And thank you for being so gracious despite everything. Andre nodded and turned to leave, but Richard suddenly spoke again. Why did you come? You must have known we weren't exactly friends in college. Andre considered the question. Curiosity partly. Nostalgia for a simpler time. And the chance to see old friends like James and Olivia. He paused. Why did you invite me? Richard's expression was unreadable. Same reason, I guess, curiosity, though I didn't expect. He gestured vaguely, seemingly unable to articulate what exactly he hadn't expected. Success comes in many forms, Richard, Andre said quietly, some more visible than others. He left them with that thought and rejoined his friends at the door. Outside in the cool evening air, Olivia linked her arm through Andre's. "That was surprisingly gracious of you. Going to talk to them after everything." Andre shrugged. "Seems like the right thing to do." "The right thing," James repeated thoughtfully. "You know, that's always been your compass, hasn't it? Even back in college. When everyone else was cutting corners or taking the easy route, you always did the right thing. Even when it was harder." "Look where it got him," Olivia said, smiling up at Andre. $3 billion and counting," Andre laughed. The money was never the goal, just a side effect of building something worthwhile. As they walked toward the parking lot, Andre's phone buzzed with notifications, emails, and messages from people who had been at the wedding, already reaching out. Word traveled fast when billions were involved. "I bet Richard is kicking himself right now," James said, finding out he just publicly accused one of the richest men in the state of stealing a wedding gift worth what? A few $100s? "Probably more like wondering how he can turn this to his advantage," Olivia countered. "Men like Richard always think there's an angle." Andre didn't respond immediately, his thoughts elsewhere. Finally, he said, "You know what's interesting? When I was just Andre Taylor guest from college, before anyone knew about my success, I was automatically suspicious in Richard's eyes. My clothes, my car, my manners, none of it mattered. He looked at me and saw what he expected to see. His friends were quiet, letting him continue. And now that everyone knows about Taylor Investments and my net worth, suddenly I'm worth respecting. Not because I'm any different than I was 2 hours ago, but because of what I have, not who I am." They reached Andre's car, a luxury vehicle that was elegant but not flashy. His driver opened the door as they approached. "Would you two like a ride to that jazz club? Or anywhere else?" Andre offered. James and Olivia exchanged a look. "Actually," James said, "the night is young and I think we all deserve something better than what we just experienced. Why don't we head to your place? You mentioned you still paint. I'd love to see your work. And we can order food, catch up properly without all this wedding drama." Andre smiled, the first genuine, unreserved smile he'd shown all evening. "I'd like that." As they drove away from the country club, Andre looked back at the brightly lit venue where the reception continued. Through the windows, he could see guests dancing and laughing, the evening's drama already becoming tomorrow's gossip. He thought about Richard, about prejudice, about wealth and perception. He thought about how different his life might have been if he'd let other people's expectations define his path. The car turned onto the main road, leaving the country club behind. Ahead lay the city skyline, many of those gleaming buildings connected to Andre's investments and vision. Behind them, a wedding reception continued, forever altered by an encounter that had revealed more than just a missing vase. "So," Olivia said, breaking into his thoughts, "tell us about this new community center project we read about." "The one in your old neighborhood?" Andre smiled again and began to explain his latest passion project. Not as a billionaire, not as a CEO, but simply as Andre, a man who remembered where he came from and still believed in doing the right thing. 1 week after the wedding, Andre sat in his office overlooking the city. The morning sun reflected off the glass buildings across from his, creating patterns of light and shadow on his desk. He had spent the last hour reviewing proposals for a new mixed-income housing development in the city's eastern district. But his mind kept drifting back to the events of the previous weekend. Nancy knocked lightly on his open door. "Morning, Mr. Taylor. I've got your schedule for the day and several messages I thought you should see personally." Andre smiled at his assistant. "Thanks, Nancy. Anything urgent?" "Depends on how you define urgent," she replied, setting a folder on his desk. 3 interview requests from business magazines, 2 from local news stations, and 1 from that financial journalist who was at the wedding, Catherine Reynolds. "She's quite persistent," Andre nodded, not surprised. Word had spread quickly about the incident at Richard's wedding. Somehow the story of a billionaire being accused of stealing a wedding gift had captured people's imagination. "Also," Nancy continued, "Harold Walsh called again. He'd like to meet for lunch next week." This did surprise Andre. He had exchanged brief pleasantries with Harold at the end of the wedding, but hadn't expected further contact. "Set it up," he said, "and tell Ms. Reynolds I'll give her 30 minutes next Monday." Nancy made a note, then hesitated. "One more thing." Richard Wilson called twice. Andre raised an eyebrow. Did he say what he wanted? No, just that it was personal and he'd prefer to speak with you directly. Andre considered this information. Part of him wanted to ignore Richard's calls completely, but another part was curious about what the man could possibly have to say after his behavior at the wedding. If he calls again, put him through, he decided. Nancy nodded and left, closing the door behind her. Andre turned to his computer to check his emails, but found himself staring at the skyline instead. Reflecting on the strange twists life sometimes took, the weekend at his penthouse with James, and Olivia had been exactly what he needed after the wedding drama, reconnecting with old friends, who knew him before his success, who valued him for who he was rather than what he owned. They had talked until the early hours of the morning, filling in the gaps of the years they'd been apart, laughing about old college stories, and discussing their hopes for the future. His intercom buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Taylor, Richard Wilson is on line 1. Andre took a deep breath. Put him through. He picked up the phone. "This is Andre Taylor." There was a brief silence on the other end, then Richard's voice sounding less confident than at the wedding. "Mr. Taylor, thank you for taking my call. I wasn't sure you would. What can I do for you, Richard?" Andre kept his tone neutral. "I was hoping we could meet, in person. There are some things I should say that would be better face to face." Andre checked his calendar. "I have 30 minutes tomorrow at 9 a.m. I'll be there," Richard said quickly. "Thank you for the opportunity." After hanging up, Andre found himself wondering what Richard could possibly say to make amends for his behavior. An apology seemed likely, but was it genuine remorse or just damage control? Richard worked in finance. He must realize the potential value of connections to Taylor Investments. The cynical part of Andre suspected tomorrow's meeting would be more about networking than making amends. The next morning, Richard arrived 15 minutes early, according to Nancy. Andre let him wait until precisely 9 a.m. before inviting him in. Richard looked different in the harsh morning light of Andre's office. Smaller somehow, less sure of himself. His expensive suit couldn't hide the dark circles under his eyes or the nervous way he adjusted his tie as he sat in the chair across from Andre's desk. "Thank you for seeing me," Richard began. "I realize your time is valuable." Andre simply nodded, waiting. Richard cleared his throat. "I came to apologize for my behavior at the wedding. It was inexcusable. I'd been drinking, I was stressed about the wedding going perfectly, and I made assumptions I shouldn't have made." "You mean you assumed I stole a wedding gift because I was the only black guest at your wedding?" Andre said bluntly. Richard flinched visibly. Yes, that's what I did." He looked down at his hands. "I've spent the past week thinking about why I reacted that way. The easy excuse is the alcohol or the stress. But the truth is uglier than that." Andre remained silent, letting Richard continue. "I grew up in a certain environment, with certain beliefs. I never thought of myself as prejudiced. I always told myself I judged people on their merits. But when something went missing and I looked around that room..." He trailed off, then forced himself to continue. "My first instinct revealed something about myself I didn't want to see. And now that you know who I am, what I'm worth, you see me differently," Andre observed. Richard nodded reluctantly. "That's part of what I've been thinking about. If I had known who you were from the beginning, I never would have..." He stopped again. "Never would have accused me," Andre finished for him. "But the problem isn't that you accused a billionaire of theft, Richard. The problem is that you would have accused anyone who looked like me, regardless of how they were dressed or how they behaved." "I know," Richard said quietly. "That's why I'm here. Not just to apologize, but to..." He seemed to struggle for words, to try to make it right somehow. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Richard straightened in his chair. "I've taken a leave of absence from Northside Financial. I'm enrolling in a diversity and inclusion training program, and I've committed to volunteer work with the Urban Youth Mentorship Program." Andre leaned back, genuinely surprised. This wasn't the networking pitch he'd expected. "That's commendable," he said carefully. "But I have to ask, are you doing this because you genuinely want to change or because you're worried about how the incident might affect your career?" Richard considered the question. "At first it was damage control," he admitted. "Heather was furious with me. Her parents threatened to withdraw their support from our marriage. My boss at Northside heard about what happened and made it clear that kind of behavior reflects poorly on the company. He met Andre's gaze directly for the first time. But then I realized that I didn't like what I saw in myself that night. I don't want to be that person. So while the initial motivation might have been selfish, I'm committed to the process for better reasons now. Andre nodded slowly, assessing Richard's sincerity. The Urban Youth Mentorship Program is a good organization. I sit on their board. I know, Richard said, then quickly added, that's not why I chose it. It's in my old neighborhood, actually. I grew up 3 blocks from their community center. This was another surprise. Andre had assumed Richard came from wealth, given his attitude and connections. Reading his expression, Richard explained, my father was a factory worker. My mother cleaned houses for the wealthy families in the suburbs. I was the first in my family to go to college. I worked hard to distance myself from where I came from, to fit in with a different crowd. Maybe that's part of why he sighed, why I became the person who would do what I did at the wedding. Andre considered Richard's words. There was something genuine in his discomfort, in his willingness to examine his own prejudices. It didn't excuse his behavior, but it suggested a capacity for growth that Andre hadn't expected. The mentorship program is always looking for volunteers who understand the challenges these kids face, Andre said after a moment. Someone who's walked in their shoes. That's what I'm hoping, Richard replied. To use my experience to help others rather than pretending I was never that struggling kid from the east side. Andre glanced at his watch. Their 30 minutes was nearly up, but he found himself wanting to continue the conversation. Have you had breakfast, Richard? Richard looked startled by the question. No, I came straight here, Andre stood up. There's a cafe downstairs with decent coffee. Let's continue this conversation there. I'd like to hear more about your plans with the mentorship program. As they walked to the elevator, Richard asked hesitantly, can I ask why you're giving me this chance? After what I did, most people would have thrown me out of their office. Andre considered his answer carefully. Because progress doesn't happen when we give up on people who show a genuine desire to change. And because I've been on the receiving end of enough prejudice to know how important second chances are. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped inside. Besides, Andre added with a small smile, the mentorship program needs all the help it can get. We're breaking ground on a new facility next month, and we'll need volunteers to help run the expanded programs. I'd be happy to help, Richard said quickly, and I think Heather would be interested too. She's a teacher. Bring her to the next board meeting, Andre suggested as they exited the elevator. We're always looking for educators' perspectives. As they walked through the lobby toward the cafe, Andre received the usual respectful nods from security guards and receptionists. He noticed Richard watching these interactions, perhaps seeing for the first time how differently Andre moved through the world compared to that night at the wedding. They found a quiet table in the corner of the cafe, ordered coffee, and continued their conversation. What had begun as an apology meeting gradually shifted to a discussion about the mentorship program, about Richard's background, about the challenges of crossing socioeconomic boundaries while remembering where you came from. By the time they finished their coffee, Andre had decided to give Richard a genuine opportunity to prove his commitment to change. Not for Richard's benefit, but for the kids in the program who needed all the positive influences they could get. 3 months later, on a warm Saturday morning, Andre stood at the podium at the groundbreaking ceremony for the new Urban Youth Mentorship Center. Behind him sat Harold and Eleanor Walsh, who had become significant donors to the project after their lunch with Andre. Beside them were James and Olivia, who had both taken on roles in the center's arts program. And in the front row, somewhat to Andre's surprise, sat Richard and Heather Wilson. Richard had thrown himself into volunteer work with remarkable dedication, spending weekends mentoring teens interested in finance, while Heather had developed an after-school tutoring program that was already showing promising results. As Andre spoke about opportunity, about breaking cycles of prejudice through education and mentorship, he caught Richard's eye in the audience. The man nodded slightly, a gesture of respect and perhaps gratitude. The incident at the wedding had been unpleasant, even painful, but it had sparked a chain of events that would ultimately benefit hundreds of young people in the community. Sometimes, Andre reflected, the worst moments could lead to unexpected positive outcomes. Today we break ground not just for a building, Andre concluded his speech, but for new possibilities, new connections, and new understandings across the divisions that too often separate us. As the crowd applauded, Andre stepped away from the podium and picked up a ceremonial shovel. The future, like the foundation they were about to dig, would be built one small action at a time.